Okay, we'll start now. Sorry for the delay, but you're going to get a recording of this session, and welcome everyone to our Facebook session on winter worries. And we've got a fabulous panel here with us today, and I'll just hand over to them for their introductions. Can I start with Jude? If you could introduce yourself and say why you're here today.
Hi everyone, thank you. My name's Jude and I'm a Blood Cancer UK ambassador because my husband is living with blood cancer.
Thanks, Jude. And Nick?
Hi everyone, I'm Nick. I'm a forum support volunteer for Blood Cancer UK. I got involved with the organisation really recently. I've personally experienced blood cancer. I live with hairy cell leukemia, and ever since I was diagnosed, treated successfully, and have been living with it, I've wanted to get involved and give back and help people.
Thanks, Nick. And my colleague, please, Lauren, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, certainly. Hi everyone, my name is Lauren and I am one of the nurse advisors here at Blood Cancer UK, and I've been here for just over a year, and we hope to be able to answer some of your questions this evening.
Thanks, Lauren. And I'm Gemma. I'm one of the nurse advisors in the support services team at Blood Cancer UK, and we've come across this subject of winter worries because we've had so many calls from our fabulous community, whether calls and emails and forum posts about issues surrounding viruses, including COVID virus over the winter, and how best to tackle it now what seems like the rest of the world is carrying on as normal. And we want to support the community because we know their vulnerabilities, and we want to help find some adaptations that will really help them get through this winter and festive period, hopefully, and have some times that are enjoyable too. We also wanted to include cost of living subject, which is really current right now, and our experts here can really help with that. And we've had, unfortunately, a lot of calls from everyone all over the UK about this, and we want to at least help post some resources and some helpful practical tips that might be really useful for you all. So that's why we're doing it. Just so you know, our amazing colleague Alice is behind the scenes, and she is creating our community forum thread about all the subjects that we've just spoken about, and so that we can carry on these discussions after this event. But you can also call us or email us or post on socials if you've got any questions, and we'll give all that information on the chat. And do post your questions on the chat and we will respond to them, Lauren and I and our wonderful support services team after this event. So just wanted to start with the kind of practical things. I'm just going to speak for a couple of moments about two things that we think are important just to mention at the start of this, and then we'll go on to questions to the panel. The first is that we just wanted to remind our community about what to do if they do test positive for COVID over the winter period. And now, whilst we're very aware of our busy hospitals and busy units at the moment, we still need to have the correct escalation in process to keep the people safe over winter. And we will be putting our COVID escalation guidelines in our chat as well. And we obviously have them on our web pages, but the escalation is still the same, whereby if you have lateral flows at home and you're symptomatic and you are eligible for an assessment for COVID treatments, do register your test, either by calling 119 or going online. Then call either and your GP 111 or treatment team, and ask them to refer you or escalate you to the COVID medicines delivery unit, who should assess you for these treatments. Now, just some tips: do have your medication list and your diagnosis details, treatment details by your side when you're waiting for that call, just so that the process goes smoothly. But we can go through this on the phone with you, so you can always come back to the support services team if you've got any issues. But all this still is happening over winter, and particularly wanted to mention it for anyone who's newly diagnosed with blood cancer recently, because often that information is not always relayed. So we wanted to make sure you're all up to date with that. And equally, not just COVID, if you do have healthcare issues, we still advise you to go to your healthcare teams, your treatment teams, your haematology teams. Whilst we understand the busyness, that is still, it is still worth persisting with these calls. But at the same time, we would really like you to have a backup if they are very busy, and that is actually going through 111 if you are concerned about your health. So we just wanted to give you a little bit of a roundup of the kind of escalation processes over the winter months. And whilst we know everything isn't always smooth, we just wanted to make sure that we have all that advice on our web pages too. So I'm now going to move on to the first question, which I'm going to direct to my colleague Lauren, and ask, these are questions that people have asked us. What can I be doing to look after myself during the winter months? Is there anything I can do to make myself feel better, or any advice that we would give?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good question. I think it's certainly one that we are dealing with a lot right now in the support service team. I think it's definitely one that Nick and Jude will be quite well au fait with for their own personal experiences. But as a kind of nurse point of view perspective, the clinical perspective, I think the probably very obvious ones will be to ensure that you're not only up to date with your COVID vaccine, obviously, but we do know that flu can hit a little bit harder this year, and is unfortunately hitting people a little bit harder. So making sure you're up to date with your flu vaccine. And there will also be certain eligibility for people who are deemed as immunocompromised to have pneumococcal shingles vaccine. There's quite a number of vaccines out there actually that people can help protect themselves and just to prevent any kind of serious ill health throughout the winter. So it's just about opening up that conversation with your treatment team, making sure that you've got all those kind of tick boxes checked for moving into the winter. And also coming back to simple things like basic hygiene of yourself and others. So hand hygiene is so underestimated actually to prevent the spread of coughs and colds, particularly if you're living with little smelly children that tend to spread all the love throughout the winter months, or indeed if you're just kind of mingling in kind of busier surroundings. Alcohol gel does not go amiss. You know, that's something we really encourage still to continue to use on top of good old-fashioned hand washing. And I think eating well, exercise, and we will probably come on later to talk about the psychological impact of keeping yourself well, but that would be my kind of top bundle of physical kind of tips that people with blood cancer can do at the moment.
Thanks, Lauren, that's brilliant. I might just take the next question to Jude, if that's okay. We talk about making sort of risk assessments for surrounding COVID and well-being, and I just wondered if you've had experience of healthcare teams saying just be careful, and what actually that means, and what you've done in your family to sort of protect yourself or put into place.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. It's almost quite a hard one to answer because obviously it's a really individual, I suppose, a really individual thing to be thinking about. But we kind of did hear that just be careful. And actually, we probably heard a stronger message, which was don't get it, don't get COVID. But obviously, don't get a cough or cold or the flu either would be ideal. And it is really frustrating to hear, I think, as our community, oh, this is our individual way, this is how we do it, but it'll not match yours. But it sometimes gives us permission to just think, what do I need to consider in our circumstances? And then sometimes to be brave enough to go X or Y, this is what we need to do. So I know we are really careful. And I know in a sense that our cautionary approach has been really expensive in terms of fear and loneliness and isolation. And I think it wouldn't be fair to say anything other than that. I think we know how important social contact is. We know how important support networks, friendship groups, they are massively important to our mental health and well-being. And Lauren, you've talked about the physical, but obviously you've said we will most likely come on. We know the two go hand in hand, our body and our mind. So for us, we are finding it a little bit hard to change our tactics. But what we do is we think of what it is we want to do, and we then basically do a risk assessment. And it sounds ridiculous, but we think, what is it we want to do? How important is it? We really do have to want to do it. Can we do it, I'm going to say, earlier in the day? Can we do it, I don't know, when the kids are at school, when there'll be fewer folk? Could we go if the shopping centres just opened? I mean, they're just examples. We happen to not be going to shopping centres. But it is about how can we reduce the risks as individuals? Because I think the days are long gone where we can really expect others to be doing an awful lot. So we look at what it is, what we want to do, how we can do it in a way that reduces the risks. Then we have a bit of a backup plan, which is if we do all of that and it still doesn't feel comfortable, do we give ourselves permission to run? And actually we do, because we don't want to compromise ourselves kind of unnecessarily. But it is really difficult, and you do need to make yourself as comfortable with some of those processes. But I will tell you that it's really tiring doing it day in, day out. And it's no wonder some of us are just choosing to be a little bit more sort of hands off. And actually just the last message is we're not all in the same boat. We are in different boats in a different storm. And if we decide that we can or can't do something, do you know what? That's okay. If you decide you can or can't do something different, that's absolutely okay. I'm not you and you're not me. So it's about doing what we think is right for us and trying to be comfortable with that decision.
That's great advice, Jude. And also it is, individual circumstances. It's about good communication with those around you and those that are involved. And I think that's so important, because as we've said in previous and even on our web pages, it's about being comfortable with your decisions. I don't know, in terms of things like mental health and well-being and finances, obviously there are decisions that people have to make for day to day to survive in some ways. Nick, have you got any kind of personal experience on making decisions to do things for kind of practical terms as well, for work, for relationships?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when Jude was speaking, I was taking myself back to when I was neutropenic and immunosuppressed. And yeah, you get told to be careful, but as Jude's alluded to, it's difficult to understand exactly what that is. And I think the key thing for me when I take myself back to that situation is that it's not feeling uncomfortable to speak to people and say, if you're not feeling great, and we ask, we're supposed to be seeing each other, tell me, and then I can make a decision, and maybe I won't come. And of course, with the festive season upon us and maybe families and friends getting together, if you are compromised in that respect, I think it's just letting people know that it's okay for them to tell you that they're not feeling great, and either they themselves don't come to something, or at least they're giving you the opportunity to make an informed decision. And I think in particular, I remember when I was in hospital and people were able to visit me, but on the haematology ward, children weren't allowed to. And obviously that's a sensible thing to consider because of kids at schools and at nurseries and the germs and the viruses and illnesses that are passed around. So I think you touched on it, Gemma. Communication is really, really key. And it's not feeling awkward about approaching it with people and asking people just to bear you in mind if you are scheduled to see them. And then I suppose if you are unable to do something because of that, there is a compromise. And then you think about the mental aspect of it. It's, can you still catch up with someone on, a video call, a FaceTime, a Zoom, to still get that interaction and that support and that community and camaraderie that you would have with friends and family, especially at the time of year that we're coming into.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. I totally agree. It's just compromise is so important, and yeah, getting that communication out there. So thank you for that. That was brilliant. Lauren, over to you. Just a little kind of practical escalation process, if you would, about, you know, if there are individuals perhaps that maybe don't have the confidence in speaking to their friends and family so much, maybe they're at the start of their blood cancer journey, for instance, what kind of pathway of escalation in terms of advice would you suggest that they ask for? Where do they go for some practical and often clinical advice as well?
So I think, particularly if we are looking at somebody who's newly diagnosed, I think one of the big things that people can do is, if it feels right for them, is to surround themselves, whether it be virtually or just through reading in the background, or just, you know, surrounding themselves with people who have or are going through something really similar. Because I think being comfortable in decision making and knowing what's right or wrong when you're newly diagnosed is a really, really tricky thing to do. I think being able to kind of bounce off thoughts, learn from experiences from peers is huge. And I think that's where our forum can be really good for that. I think that's where just kind of meeting people in a clinical environment to be able to have those conversations, reading some things on the internet, although doing it from a kind of safe and evidence-based way. But again, sometimes it's just as simple as starting that conversation, being quite transparent with your team to say, these are my worries. And I think it's also really important to raise that no worry is a silly worry, the same way that no question is a silly question. Nobody can assume that you know what it's going to be like to be a blood cancer patient. Nobody is going to belittle you or make you feel any sort of way for asking a question that may to others be something that's quite obvious. I think escalation process is hugely important across all aspects of healthcare. But in particular, I think just now with the pressures of the NHS, whether you're new diagnosed, late diagnosed, difficulty in having a diagnosis, or somebody who's been under a haematology team for decades and are just finding that they're just not feeling particularly cared for or particularly reassured, then I think knowing that first of all, you can always come through to us as a little bit of a kind of advocacy service or a bit of a signposting service on our helpline or via email in any which way, for us just to kind of direct you on what the right things, maybe the next steps are for you to take. But ultimately, it's about having the confidence in your own kind of voice, if you will, in sharing your concerns with your clinical nurse team, if you have one. And if you don't, it's asking if you've got one. Your consultant haematologist, we appreciate it's not always easy to get in touch with your teams. And I think that that's felt throughout, regardless of where you're at, whether you're newly diagnosed or later on. It's the lay of the land, unfortunately, at the moment. But also, I think in the bigger aspect of things, which we've heard a lot from Gemma, haven't we, through the last kind of wee while with COVID and the impact of the NHS pressures at the moment, is that there are procedures in hospitals and places that you can kind of escalate your grievances to, whether it be GP practice managers, whether it be your PALS team within your local hospital. It's just allowing your voice to be heard. It doesn't always need to come across as a complaint or a grievance, but it's just ensuring, unfortunately, that we are, using different teams of people to kind of ultimately give you that big reassurance and to allow you to kind of have your point put across. So yeah, I think that's kind of, could probably talk about it for longer, but I think that's probably like the step-by-step process. But if anyone's really unsure, by all means give us a little call and we can talk through if you're not happy with your treatment, or if you're just unsure if actually you're on the right pathway, if more should be happening than what you've heard, particularly when you're just kind of newly diagnosed. That can be really unsettling.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's very daunting, that first step, to ask for help in whichever way, whether it be COVID advice or general advice. And I think there are resources out there. It's just sometimes you can get battered from pillar to post, which is really upsetting. And we can help with kind of trying to find that way forward, hopefully. And but it's important to get your voice out there. So thank you so much, Lauren. over to you. You're now asking the questions.
Thank you very much. What I just want to say as well is just to acknowledge for anyone that is, and we will pop all our links for contact to be able to come in to our support service helpline here at Blood Cancer UK. But just as a reminder of our helpline number, it is 0808 208 0888. And our email address is support@bloodcancer.org.uk, and you will also find a link to our forum within our web pages. Just a little bit of a plug there. So as Gemma has said, I'm going to ask the next few questions, and the next one I would like to ask and possibly direct both to you, Jude and Nick, is a question that we've had in for somebody asking, I want to spend this Christmas, with my family, but I don't know what is the best thing to do. I don't know how to broach the subject of being careful on the lead up to Christmas. I don't know how to ask them to do lateral flows. And I think it's just really about finding that kind of balance for somebody to broach that in order to try and keep their selves safe. So I don't know if you've got any lived experience. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I kind of had put some thought into this because I think it feels more difficult this year than ever, because I think for the last couple of Christmases, everybody, again, different boat, but same kind of storm. And I think most people now are back to whatever their normality was. And you know what? That's absolutely brilliant. But that increases the risk then to families like mine. And that's not being kind of pessimistic. That is being realistic with what we know. It's where I'm now anxious a little bit about Christmas. I'm anxious about, do I need to have the conversation for the millionth time about, we would maybe ask you to consider being out and about a little bit less for the 5-6 days before we see you. We have to travel to see family, and we can do that relatively safely because we've got arrangements in place, but it's more we see them the day before Christmas and they've been on the work night out that week, and there's, X and Y else, and that's brilliant. But then they could be harboring not just COVID, but obviously something else. And I'm definitely feeling less confident in saying to them, go and do a lateral flow test before you see us. But I'm going to have to own that. Because actually nobody that we know would intentionally put my husband or us at risk. Not in a heartbeat, they wouldn't do that. And if all I need to do is say, go on, do a test, then listen, I'm going to have to do that. And nobody is going to say, nope, not doing it. I do know they're no longer free for everybody else. And I am conscious of that. A family of 5 doing a lateral flow test for us, what's that going to be, £10? And do they need to do it every time? Because if they've been out in between, but we'll work that out, I think, as a family, because I think the bigger picture is the payback that we'll get from some interaction. But, we most likely won't do hugging. We most likely will stay sort of socially distanced, but that's okay in a big room. That's not weird. We used to do that because nobody sits on top of each other. But again, do you see, like I said last time, genuinely, I think it's okay to say I'm really tired of having to analyze all this and always think about this. It feels like it's been 100 years. We've been living with blood cancer for 7 years. It may as well be 700. And we felt it was quite hard before COVID. But again, it's okay to say that COVID has made that more complicated. But if you don't ask in life, you don't get. And if you need to remind folk, we are a wee bit different, we're very special, then I think everybody would be willing to do what they can.
Absolutely. I think there's a huge kind of important sentiment around that, about life in terms of interacting closely with people. That kind of physical hug probably comes now second nature almost to not do that. And it's not about shying away from asking. I think we certainly hear on the support line a lot of anxieties and kind of barriers and that, and it really prevents people from being able to socialise to any degree. And I hope that after today's conversation, that's something that people can take away as maybe just a little bit of clarity and a little bit of confidence about making those small kind of finely tuned, balanced risks, just to be able to kind of open up your world that little bit. Nick, I might ask you the same question if you've had any lived experience in the barriers of asking people or dealing with social events round about the festive period and what you felt has helped.
Yeah, again, it's communication, isn't it? And I think it's just trying to get people to put themselves in your position, either as the family member who's traveling with someone who's immunosuppressed or the person themselves. It's hoping that people have an empathetic approach, that just reminding them, because if you've been ill for a while and it's not acute anymore, but you've still got the health compromise, unfortunately other people are going about their lives and they don't necessarily forget, but they don't see it as maybe the severity as they did when they found out that you were ill initially. So I don't think there's anything wrong with speaking to people and just, very kindly asking them to consider from your position, can they understand it, and then will they work with you? So if it is a gathering in and around the festive period, it's just being really, really sensible, isn't it? You want to go and do it. And as Jude was saying with the risk assessment, can you go and do it? Can you social distance? Can you ensure everybody's maintaining really good hand hygiene? Don't touch people, hug and things like that, and still have the same experience, just with people understanding, being empathetic and being considerate of your, not unique, but less common circumstances. And you'd like to think that friends and family that care about you are more than prepared to go and do that. So again, it's not feeling awkward or stupid for having those conversations, because I think once you remind people sometimes that you are compromised, but you still want to live as normal a life as possible, they're really empathetic and they'll work with you and they'll go and do it.
100%. I think that's really brilliant advice. I think you both kind of are mirroring exactly what we all feel with regards to the people you're going to be sharing the festivities with, whatever that may look like. It is very likely that people want to do no harm. And I think that's the thing. Often it is maybe a lack of understanding about why the underpinning kind of reasons for these requests or for these gentle conversations to have. So that's really helpful. Kind of flipping it somewhat, we had a question that was from the friend or family member. So they have asked, I'm worried about saying the wrong thing to my friend or family member or loved one who is going through blood cancer, as I'm spending a lot of time with them over the Christmas holidays. Has anyone got any, I'm sure you do, got any good advice for this particular supporter of ours?
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in. Certainly as a patient, you get that sense that, I put myself back to when it had all happened initially and you are immunosuppressed, and some people are really awkward around you, and it's not because they don't care, it's because they do care. So to put yourself in that position, I thought about this earlier on today because I was obviously aware of the question. And I think to put someone on the spot in front of other people without speaking to them beforehand is probably the wrong thing to do. So potentially if you are aware that you're going to be sat with somebody that's ill, and you genuinely want to know how they're doing, maybe just say to them privately in advance of that, and you don't even have to do it face to face. I want to ask how you're doing, but I don't want to make it awkward for you. Are you comfortable in this environment discussing it? Because me personally, I'm really open and I'm more than happy to talk to people about what I went through, what it looks like now, what it potentially looks like in the future. I'm very open, but I'm not saying that's the right way to be. And other people will be totally different. And certainly where it's very raw and very acute and they've been recently diagnosed, because, there's a lot of uncertainty and apprehension around that. So my thoughts on this topic is that if you're thinking it could potentially be a difficult conversation in advance of that social gathering or that interaction, maybe just speak to them privately and say, I care, I want to know how you're doing, but I also appreciate you might want to talk about it. So just let me know. And again, it's not feeling difficult or awkward or stupid to have that conversation, because again, you're just showing that you care and you do understand their position. And some people will say, I'm absolutely cool with talking about it. And other people will say, do you know what, in that environment, I'm not comfortable in talking about it. And I think if you breach it in advance, I think that's personally the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something there about there probably being no right or wrong answer here. I think it's everyone's kind of personality or feelings around that subject being brought to the surface and discussed is completely variable. But probably what means the most is the fact that somebody has considered even your, you in that conversation and how that might affect you, rather than either completely avoiding it or completely kind of throwing into the throes of strong, deep conversation, maybe not at the right time. So I think that's a brilliant piece of advice, Nick. Thank you. Jude, have you got anything to add?
Well, I'm shaking my head. I don't know why, because I'm about to say something. Nick, I absolutely kind of share those thoughts. I mean, actually, I sort of smiled when I sort of knew that question being asked, because I've been asked it and I've heard it enough in our experience. And actually, even someone thinking that or asking it, you just get a big thumbs up from me, because it already shows you care. And to some extent, that's almost all we need. I mean, there's a little bit more than that, but someone, as you said, Nick, considering it even does show that there's a level of understanding which you can definitely work on to develop as you choose to do it. I think personally, I'm not sure you can really say the wrong thing at all to someone if it comes from a good place. However, I definitely know from the forum, and I definitely know from our own experience, do you see, leading a conversation with, my goodness, you look well, that's definitely something that I find very irritating, because whilst it's meant in a good way, it's not how sometimes that person is feeling. And then it does two things. You've either got the person trying to justify, oh, I might look well, but I'm feeling rubbish. Or you've got someone going, I was just about to say, I'm actually finding it a bit tough and I'll not bother now, because they're kind of saying that I look fine. And you can decide in those moments kind of how that feels. So it's not that it's the wrong thing to say, it's just it's not particularly helpful. But Nick, what you said about where someone might ask how you're doing is something that I had kind of noted. And also, I think as people, we are very good at asking someone how they are. I don't know if we're that good at listening to what they say, because and I do this as well, I think we're just biding time sometimes to speak again. And I find that something quite powerful to say, but actually it's about giving that person their place, however they choose to use it, whether, as you say, Nick, it's a, listen, we'll have a conversation another time, or they start to unload. Don't plan your conversations. That really comes across. Do you see when someone plans it because they're anxious? It really comes across as quite mechanical, and that's not what anyone wants. And then both people, I think, can end up very uncomfortable. And check in with people, really simply, just check in and make time for someone. It's not something we should ask an individual once. And just to finish off, I think something that definitely comes across in our community and definitely in my own life, to someone who's a friend or a family member of someone with blood cancer, or of me who doesn't but who cares for someone, we are still interested in you. We're still really interested in how your work day was, what the children are doing, how much they're driving you mad, what's happening with your parents, your trials, your challenges, your successes. I think people sometimes get really uncomfortable sharing good news, or indeed not good news. So for me, it would be about, you're not going to say the wrong thing, because if there's a relationship, it's there for a reason. But actually, it's not one way. We still want to hear how you're doing. It's not all about us, and we don't think that it is.
Oh, thank you, Jude. I think that's so important. Honestly, I think as much as people living with blood cancer absolutely are surrounded and are in that world, it's often really nice just for that sense of normality, that, as you say, that non-forced conversation to happen, and for at a time that's right for that individual, so I think just for us to be able to kind of discuss that and for you to put that out there is really, really important and powerful. So thank you. And I think the next question I have leads on, really quite nicely, and is one that I know when I first, when we had our questions, and this one kind of really struck a chord with me, because I think winter can be long, the nights can be even longer, the days can be longer, and I think it is a question particularly about loneliness, coping with not seeing family over Christmas and managing Christmas alone. We know we certainly through the support line have an awful lot of concerns about not just over the festive period, but actually throughout the last few years because of the circumstances of living with COVID. So Gemma, I wondered if I could aim this one at you and just ask on your perspective for anyone that isn't able to be with their loved ones over the kind of coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I've thought about this in for two situations. Of course, I thought about patients that will be in hospital, having just been diagnosed or having their treatment, and that whilst a lot of hospitals have visiting guides now in regard to COVID, etc., it's not what is usual for people to be like over Christmas or any time of the year, in actual fact, when it's perhaps just one visitor per week and such. So in terms of inpatients, just be very mindful, as if you're the person experiencing this, do welcome people in terms of through the power of what we're doing today, FaceTime, phone calls, making sure if there are visiting allowances, if you feel that that is something you would like, then allow that visitor to come in to see you, as long as they're well, and there'll be strict guidelines, I'm absolutely sure, for inpatients as well. But to also have that thought about, yes, it is a festive period for some, and that you can celebrate at any time when you are better and hopefully feeling more like celebrating with your loved ones. So I think that's one thing to consider. Whilst it's, you know, there will be a lot of people around you with the nurses and doctors and physios and dietitians and everyone, it won't be the same, granted, but you will still have people to talk to, and that is good as well, to open those conversations if you are that person. I was also thinking about those people that choose to be on their own because they are concerned about potential infections and you know, the COVID risk, and perhaps despite having all their vaccinations, they still feel very anxious about COVID. And I think you know, we should all respect people's decisions, as we were saying earlier, respecting those risk assessments people have made, the comfort that they have in seeing someone. You would never want someone to dread your arrival coming into the home. You know, that's not what being with someone's about. So I think, you know, from loved ones' point of view is to respect their decisions, but do you know what? You can still give them a call, you can still FaceTime them, you can send lovely letters. So, you know, those little hampers or something, those things that will really mean a lot. And also make those plans, you know, make sure both the inpatient and those people at home have plans in the future, because we're all used to plans, and this last few years and diagnosis of blood cancer take those plans away. And I think it's important to say, right, when the spring comes, or such things that we will be able to meet, and without getting too emotional about it, you know, there are times that people will meet again, which is really important. I just think just trying to invest time and thoughtful sort of gestures is so lovely for people, but again, as always, respecting what they want at all times. So that's certainly from when I was on the wards, we did try and make Christmas as, you know, as not special, that's the wrong word, but we still put a meaning to it for those patients that celebrated. So I'm sure that will be the same, but it's just about being thoughtful about those patients and those loved ones as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if it may be helpful as well, just to acknowledge that if there is anybody out there that is really significantly struggling with the thought of being alone, or even just prior to the festivities and really struggling at the moment, because we know that loneliness can be, you know, really very much a symptom of any kind of condition that you live with, but just really, really difficult to manage, that you are never alone. And that is exactly why we are at the end of the helpline as well. So please do consider that if you ever are feeling really quite isolated, to reach out to us, because we can be, on most days, nothing more than just a listening ear. And if that helps, then we would absolutely welcome and encourage you to have the confidence, if you can, to pick up the phone and give us a call. Also, I will very just briefly touch upon other signposting, because purely from what we've seen in our support team, and what we've kind of had conversations with over the most kind of recent weeks and months, of some really difficult heightened anxieties, and isolation will be in there, and that sense of not able to share, for whatever reason, social time with other people. And if things just become too much, and it is a place where you just feel you can't escape your own thoughts, and life just seems like it's becoming a little bit impossible, then please know that as much as we are here, Samaritan's Helpline is a wonderful resource, and they have a crisis team that is available 24 hours a day. And we will make sure that when we are posting this video, that we will include some links to some really good resources. So I just wanted to touch upon that, because it's certainly something that we have seen kind of ramped up a little bit of late, understandably.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm going to just briefly go over this next question, because I'm aware that we've probably got about 10 minutes, and the last question is really important just now. But it was a question from the forum, who they just said, I'm keen to know about the general infection advice for people pre-pandemic would have been. Was it to avoid large crowds, people with colds, etc., etc.? And is that kind of similar to what the COVID risk is now for people? And I would say very briefly that blood cancer patients have always had to be very mindful of infections, whether they be viral or bacterial, independent to some extent of treatment intensivity, so that it can be watch and wait, it can be treatment heavy. And I know advice was always given about being near people that have had gastrointestinal bugs, respiratory viruses, avoiding them for at least 2 days, those sorts of things, avoiding public transport where possible if there's, for instance, a post-bone marrow transplant, etc. So there was always these guidelines in place, but they obviously have been elevated to a more global level for COVID, but then back down again. And then there's still the blood cancer community and others that who are vulnerable, left behind with the same kind of concerns. I guess what I would say is that, you know, we do have vaccines, we do have treatments, which this time last year, when Jude and I were chatting about coping with Christmas on a similar event, we didn't have the treatments available. So I guess that is a progression, and we have to feel positive about that, but much more is needed. So that kind of general awareness of infection management that we've been talking about applies now, and it applied then, but it's much more, I guess it's just been elevated with COVID. So that was just, I was just going to briefly go over that, Lauren, so I can ask you and Nick this next question, if that is okay. And I think, Nick, I'll go to you first, if that's all right. Cost of living over winter, and we just wanted to see if you had any support or tips, practical advice that you could give.
Yeah, sure. 3 things that I'll briefly run through that may or may not, but hopefully will help people. One's just a general one that, from my kind of professional experience, work-wise, I've always been speaking to people about, and it's just a basic review of your income and your expenditure. So if you're noticing that things are becoming tougher or have been tough for a period of time, very simply sit down and, you know, print off or go onto your online banking and have a look at all your direct debits, make a list of those, have a look at what your income is, be really, really specific, down to like, what do you spend every week when you shop? What do you put in your car for fuel? If you've got a petrol or diesel vehicle every month, and when I've done this with people, and this is friends, family, people professionally, a lot of people are really, really amazed at what the bottom line looks at and what they spend the money on. So it's a really simple thing that can take a little bit of time, but looking at income, looking at expenditure, and then running through it and going, are there unnecessary things every month that I'm spending? You know, it might be a subscription that you just don't use. Are there things that you can get but pay less for? And that's where, you know, we've got the beauty of comparison sites, utilities, which obviously are difficult, which I'll come on to in a second, insurances, even things like childcare costs. You know, are there alternatives that will save you money and put you in a better situation month after month financially? Can you reduce your shopping costs? Can you batch cook, freeze? You know, a simple thing that I am horrendous at doing, but I'm telling people to do: look at what you've got in the fridge, look at what you've got in the cupboards before you go shopping, so that you don't spend more than you need to do. Check what you've got before you go shopping, and look at things like reduced items which they have every day in supermarkets. Look at own brands rather than branded items. And then one final thing before I come on to a couple of more specific things is, do you own things that are of value to other people that you don't need or use that you can sell? You know, eBay and other sites have been around for years and years now. There's loads of things that I'm sure people don't use, whether it's clothes or appliances or other things that they can turn into cash, especially when times are tight. Second one is a bit more specific. It's your direct living costs, either your rent or your mortgage. Where people are struggling or maybe in arrears, what I've seen, again, professionally, historically, is a lot of people in that position just don't want to deal with it. And I think obviously that's the worst thing to do. And if it's a landlord or a mortgage lender, just get in touch with them and discuss it. And it's okay to admit that you're in difficulties, and they will much rather you bring this to their attention. Because most of the time people want to help you, and certainly lenders, the perception that they've had historically, they have to help you now, and they'll discuss payment holidays with you. And if you're in that situation where you're discussing a payment holiday with a lender on a mortgage, for example, just little things like asking them to freeze any interest, so that what you owe, it stays. You know, if you've got a holiday for 3 months, you're still owing the same amount and no interest has been added to it. Always get it in writing once you've agreed something with that landlord or lender. And then the last thing, because it is a consideration, and this is something that people became aware of during COVID, when perhaps they couldn't meet the mortgage payments, and payment holidays, I think, probably became more and more publicised, was just check that your lender's not going to make reference with credit agencies, because you may have a decision where a payment holiday on your mortgage is something that you would like, but if it's going to compromise your credit long term and you can make savings elsewhere, you can make an informed decision on what to do. And the last one, which is, you know, extremely topical, is energy bills, and I think a little bit of the support that is available, and again, 1 or 2 practical things. So again, if you're struggling to pay your utilities, gas, electric, water, contact the suppliers. Their regulators have ensured that they are obligated to support you and provide help. This is usually in the form of a negotiated payment plan. Again, there are hardship funds, grants available that you can research online. And of course, if you haven't done, just ensure that the cost of living support, the £66 per month, either a credit to your direct debit if you pay that way, or if you're on prepayment or no smart meter, it's 6 payments. Just ensure that your utility suppliers have already done that, and if not, speak to them and ensure you get that. One for pensioners, if there is someone living in the house, they've got the winter fuel payment scheme, which I understand's increased up to £600 now for this winter. Oh, sorry, it's increased up to 600, I think, from 400. And then 1 or 2 practical ones in relation to trying to reduce your current energy bills. Use LED light bulbs. They're about 15 to 20% of the cost of incandescent or halogen. turn your thermostat down if you can do, by 1 or 2 degrees, because honestly, over the course of 6 to 9 months, it will make a massive difference on what you're spending. Of course, if you're comfortable doing that, if you can do it, it's a really good way to reduce your energy bills. Use eco settings on appliances. So for example, washers, dryers, things like that. Reduce your heat on your washing machine to 30 degrees, just little things that if you compound them, they will add up and they'll save you money over the winter. And then the last one, which I'm going to smile at because I love long showers, is have shorter showers. So that is it for me.
Too. Nick, that honestly, those practical tips are brilliant. And actually, I think there's something there to be said about, you know, getting them on paper for us and being able to relay them, because from that professional insight as well is super, super helpful. And I think it is all the little things. Jem, I'll just very quickly run over a couple of top tips that I think from a nursing perspective and making people aware of that. We fully understand that having cancer, living with cancer, having a loved one with cancer, the financial implications before the cost of living crisis were astronomical. But now they are, you know, they're really, it can really, really push people to really desperate situations, and we're fully aware of that. So the first thing I'll say is please contact us and have a conversation about it. It's a very difficult conversation, I would imagine, to have, but it's important. It's very important, because actually there is a huge amount of help out there, and sometimes it's just knowing where to start. I think that's it. It's where to start and where to tap into. When somebody is newly diagnosed, they often don't appreciate that they may be entitled to some additional healthcare benefits and or grants being money, typically one-off payments, emergency funding payments, which are pushed through that you do not need to pay back, and indeed healthcare welfare grants coming from the government for people who are symptomatic and suffering acute or chronic conditions. We do have some information on our money and work pages on our website, so please do have a look. There is a free online, there's many free online benefits checkers, so you can look and see what you may be eligible for, and that includes children, teenagers, adults, elderly. Another top tip would be please, please, please talk to your treatment team, talk to your nurses, talk to your doctors if you're financially struggling, because again, there is often a really good process that we have in hospitals that we can then signpost you to the right people. We have people in the hospitals, we have people in the community that can really help with form filling and just allowing you to have the confidence in what you're applying for. Another top tip would also be from myself is to check your insurance policies that you maybe already have pre-existing. A lot of people who have mortgages, there may be an element of life insurance tied in there that they wouldn't automatically think of. And actually, it's not something that's raised very often from teams. When you're in the hospitals, the financial aspect is often forgotten about. And again, I think it's exactly what Nick said. It's just about kind of having these conversations, talking about it, and knowing that there is help out there. So please do get in touch with us if there's any financial concerns that you have whatsoever. We'll make sure we put some links when we pop this video on our website as well.
Thanks, Lauren. That's brilliant. And I know recently on our social communications there was some great links for crisis funds from our charity colleagues, which just might help over this period, because it's terribly tough. And yeah, they're recently out, but as you say perfectly, we've got many a resource available for you to use. So we've done an hour of this. We could have talked for 2 or 3 hours, I think, about this topic. I think myself, I feel like it's the communication aspect of the concerns around either your finances or your health over these winter period times, the festive season, that is so important. And being confident in knowing who to talk to, and whether that be a loved one or someone on a phone line like Lauren and myself, or our lovely team as well, or your treatment team if possible. It's good to reach out and be very honest about your concerns, because we have to do that to make things happen, and to make people understand, and also to raise awareness of what our community is experiencing, the more we do that, the more understanding and awareness will come. So I really appreciate our fantastic panel's time. Jude and Nick, thank you so much, and lovely Lauren too. Wishing both Jude and Nick a lovely festive period, and keep everyone well, and we shall all see you again soon. So thanks very much.